The sun had barely risen over the distant planet Velithor, a world torn between peace and war. Yet, in the heart of the royal palace, a new day began with a gathering that promised to change everything. The galaxy had been watching, waiting for the peace talks between the Shinthar Empire and the Arvian coalition to succeed. But this was not just about politics. It was about the future of two powerful sisters, each with her own claim to the throne. Ethan, a young human diplomat, had been sent by the Terran Federation to attend these talks. He had been trained for diplomacy. But nothing could prepare him for the complex web of emotions and secrets he would soon find himself tangled in. Walking through the grand halls of the Shinthar Palace, Ethan could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The palace was full of luxurious tapestries and marble columns, a testament to the wealth and power of the Shinthar Empire. The alien guards stood tall and silent, their eyes hidden behind black masks, while the royal servants went about their duties carrying trays of exotic fruits and drinks. It was here, amidst the opulence and the tension of the political talks, that Ethan met the two princesses. The first to approach him was Lyra, the younger of the two. She had a gentle smile and an air of warmth about her, unlike the coldness that seemed to follow her older sister. Lyra's violet eyes sparkled with curiosity as she extended her hand to Ethan. Her voice, soft and melodic, was like a breath of fresh air in the tense atmosphere of the palace. "It's an honor to finally meet you," Ambassador Lyra said. "I hope the journey was comfortable." Ethan, taken by her beauty and the kindness in her voice, smiled warmly. "The honor is mine, Your Highness," he replied, shaking her hand. "I've heard much about the Shinthar Empire. It's a privilege to be here." Lyra's smile deepened, and for a moment there was a brief connection between them, a spark that neither could explain. Ethan was used to formalities, but there was something about Lyra that felt genuine, something different from the cold, calculated politeness he had often encountered in his line of work. Before he could speak further, a soft but commanding voice interrupted them. "You've met Lyra, I see." Ethan turned and found himself face to face with Zara, Lyra's older sister. Zara was every bit the image of royalty, tall, poised, and radiating an air of authority. Her silver hair cascaded down her back like a flowing river, and her sharp, calculating eyes glinted with intelligence. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a careful, measured calm. Unlike Lyra's softness, Zara exuded a cold, calculating confidence that Ethan couldn't help but respect, "Your Highness," Ethan greeted, bowing slightly as he had been taught. Zara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze flickering. Between him and her sister, "I trust the ambassador is settling in well," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "This is a place for decisions, not pleasantries." Ethan could tell that Zara was not one to waste time with small talk. "Of course," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm here to help with the peace talks, Your Highness." Zara's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she were measuring him in a way that made Ethan uncomfortable. "You may be the one to help us end a long-standing war. The Arvian coalition will not be easy to convince." "I understand," Ethan replied, trying to sound confident. "But peace is always worth fighting for." Lyra, sensing the tension, smiled softly. "My sister may seem a bit harsh," she said to Ethan, her voice light, "but she's right. About one thing, peace is never simple." "I do hope you're ready for the challenge, Ambassador," Ethan nodded, grateful for Lyra's attempt to lighten the mood. But as he looked between the two sisters, he realized that there was far more at play here than just diplomacy. Zara and Lyra were not just political figures. They were two women bound by a shared past and the complex weight of their families. Expectations as the day passed. Ethan found himself spending more and more time with Lyra. She was not only intelligent but also compassionate, stark contrast to her sister's rigid and calculating demeanor. Lyra spoke of her dreams of a peaceful future, one where her people could finally live without fear of war. She was passionate, and her words had an earnestness that made Ethan believe in her cause. Later that evening, after the royal banquet, Lyra invited Ethan to a quiet garden outside the palace. The soft hum of alien technology blended with the distant sounds of nature, creating a peaceful atmosphere. The stars twinkled above them, a reminder of the vastness of the universe, and for a brief moment, the weight of political duty seemed to vanish. "I think you're different from the others," Lyra said softly, her violet eyes meeting his. "You're not like the other diplomats who only care about their own agenda. You listen. You care." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. He felt the growing tension between them, a pull that was hard to ignore. "I care because I want to see peace too," he said quietly. Lyra smiled, a rare smile that lit up her face. "Maybe together we can make that happen." But as Ethan stared into Lyra's eyes, a sudden chill ran down his spine. Something wasn't right. He didn't know why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the situation than met the eye that night. As Ethan lay in his quarters, he couldn't help but think of the princesses. Lyra's warmth and sincerity had made him believe that peace was possible. But Zara's cold, calculating demeanor kept him on edge. There was something between the sisters, something unresolved, and Ethan had a feeling he was caught in the middle of it. What he didn't know, however, was that the choices he made in the coming days would not only affect the fate of the peace talks, but also the heart of the Shinthar Empire itself. The struggle for power, love, and loyalty was about to intensify, and Ethan was about to become a key player in a game much bigger than he could ever have imagined. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the Shinthar Empire, casting its light across the sprawling palace grounds. But inside the grand walls of the palace, the air was thick with tension. Ethan had spent the previous night contemplating everything. He had learned about the sisters, their father, and the role he had been brought into. What had seemed like a simple diplomatic mission now felt far more complicated than he had ever imagined. He had hoped for a quiet breakfast, a moment to gather his thoughts. Instead, as he stepped into the palace's vast dining hall, he found both Lyra and Zara already seated at the long table, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Zara's cold gaze shifted toward Ethan as he entered, but it was Lyra who greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Ambassador," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle tone he had grown to admire. "Good morning, Princess Lyra," Ethan replied, taking a seat beside her. Despite the tense atmosphere, he couldn't help but feel a sense of calm whenever Lyra was near. Zara didn't bother to acknowledge his presence. She simply poured herself a drink, her eyes focused on the distant horizon beyond the windows. Ethan could feel the unspoken tension between the sisters, like a storm waiting to break. But he wasn't sure why. There was clearly something more going on behind their royal masks. Before he could ask anything, a voice filled with authority and bitterness interrupted the silence. "You can't have him, Zara." Zara's voice was calm, but her words were sharp, like a blade cutting through the morning air. "He was promised to me as well." Ethan froze, his hand pausing midway to his glass. He had expected many things during his mission, but this was not one of them. Both sisters were now looking at him, but it was Zara who seemed the most unmoved, her expression cold and unreadable. "Zara," Lyra whispered, a touch of disbelief in her voice. "What do you mean, Ethan?" Turned to Lyra, his eyes searching for an explanation, but all he received was a quiet shake of her head. There was no hint of anger or jealousy in her expression. Only confusion and hurt. Zara, on the other hand, looked as though she were explaining something very simple, as though it were just another piece of royal business. She set her drink down with a clink and met Ethan's eyes directly. "When our father, King Vorel, first arranged the peace talks, he made certain arrangements. He promised me to you as part of the negotiations," Zara explained coldly. "It was never meant to be a simple alliance, Ambassador. I was promised to you as part of a political contract, one that would unite our people and ensure that the Shinthar Empire would maintain its strength in the galaxy." Ethan's heart sank as he tried to process what Zara had said. He had been brought here to help bring peace between two factions, nothing more. He had never agreed to any kind of political arrangement, let alone a promise made between two alien sisters. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "But I didn't know," she said softly, her eyes brimming with disbelief. "I had no idea that you were promised to her, Zara." I thought she stopped, unable to finish her sentence. Ethan could see the pain in Lyra's eyes, the hurt of having something so important kept from her. It was clear to him that she had no knowledge of this arrangement, and it didn't take long for him to realize that Zara had been holding on to this secret for far too long. Zara's smile was as cold as ice. "You think I didn't know what father was doing?" she said to Lyra. "He made sure everything was arranged to his liking. You've always been the naive one, sister." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, her voice gaining strength. "This isn't right, Zara. We've always had a choice." "Why would you go along with this?" Zara sighed, her expression hardening. "'Cause sometimes we don't have a choice. You'll understand that soon enough, Lyra." Ethan, still unsure how to respond, remained silent. His mind was spinning with the implications of Zara's words. He had thought that the mission to Velethor was about creating peace, but now it felt like he had become a pawn in a much larger game. His involvement in the peace talks, it seemed, was more than just an opportunity to help broker a truce. Had been entangled in a royal dispute, one that had been brewing for years, long before he had even arrived. For the first time since he had entered the palace, Ethan felt like an outsider. A foreigner caught between two powerful forces, both of whom saw him as something to be won. Zara's gaze turned back to him, her eyes steely and calculating. "You'll choose me, of course. I am the one who can ensure the survival of our empire. If you help me, we'll win this war. I'll give you all the power you could ever want, Ethan." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I never agreed to this," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "I never promised anyone anything." Lyra's hand reached out, brushing against his arm gently. "Please." "Ambassador," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't want this to tear us apart. I don't want to be part of a political game. I just want a chance at peace." The sincerity in her voice hit him hard. Moment, Ethan considered the choices before him. On one side, there was Zara cold, calculated, and willing to use him for her own gain. On the other side, there was Lyra gentle, kind, and willing to fight for what she believed in, even if it meant going against her own family, the sisters. Rivalry had always been a part of their lives, but now it had reached a boiling point. And Ethan, standing in the middle, was expected to choose a side. As the day progressed, Ethan's thoughts remained clouded. The more he learned about the royal family, the more he realized how deep the politics went. Zara's ambition was as cold as her heart, while Lyra's passion was as fierce as the stars themselves. Each sister had a vision for the future of the Shinthar Empire, but neither seemed willing to share that vision with the other. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he was truly just a pawn in their game, or if there was something more at stake than he had been told. The weight of the decision ahead of him pressed down harder with each passing hour. Ethan lay awake in his quarters long after the palace had fallen silent. The weight of Zara's words kept swirling in his mind, a constant reminder that his mission was no longer just about peace. It had become a tangled web of promises, lies, and politics. The stakes had risen far higher than he had anticipated, and he didn't know who he could trust anymore. The next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Ethan walked through the grand halls of the palace, his mind preoccupied with everything he had learned. He had spent years as a diplomat, negotiating with various species, but he had never faced anything quite like this. The Shinthar Empire was powerful. The royal family seemed more like a battlefield than a symbol of unity. When Ethan entered the council chamber, the two princesses were already present, sitting on opposite sides of a long table. Lyra's eyes softened as she saw him, her warm smile returning despite the tension between them. Zara, on the other hand, barely acknowledged his presence, her eyes cold and distant. She was focused on a holographic map of the galaxy. Tracing the locations of the warring factions that surrounded them, Lyra's voice broke the silence. "Ambassador, I hope you slept well," she said softly, her voice gentle as ever. Ethan nodded. "I did, thank you. But I've been thinking about what you both said yesterday." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I never agreed to any political arrangement. I was sent here to help broker peace, not to get involved in family matters." Lyra's expression softened even further. "I understand. This is not what I wanted either. But my father has always believed that everything, even marriage, can be a tool for power. She glanced over at Zara, who did not seem to be paying attention. Zara and I have never been asked what we want. Our lives were decided for us before we were even born. Zara finally looked up from the holographic map, her eyes sharp. You're naive if you think your involvement doesn't matter, Ambassador, she said coldly. You're a part of this now, whether you like it or not. Father has set his plans in motion. My marriage is essential to securing the future of the Empire. Ethan looked between the two sisters, the differences in their personalities more obvious than ever. Lyra's voice was filled with sorrow and longing, while Zara's tone was filled with cold practicality. It was clear that the sisters had been shaped by their father's expectations. And now, Ethan was caught in the middle of their struggle. I wasn't aware of the full extent of the situation, Ethan said quietly. But it seems I'm now involved whether I want to be or not. Zara's lips curled into a thin smile. It's better to accept the reality, Ambassador. You'll find that the Shinthar Empire isn't like the peacekeeping factions you're used to. We don't operate by ideals, we operate by power. Ethan's stomach tightened at her words. He had always known that politics could be ruthless, but Zara's attitude showed him just how far some would go for control. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flash of light as the holographic map shifted. A new message appeared. It's from Father, Lyra murmured, stepping closer to the table. The message appeared, a hologram of King Vorel, the ruler of the Shinthar Empire. His expression was unreadable, but the power in his voice was unmistakable. Daughters. The king's voice echoed through the chamber. The time has come. You will both be ready to make your choices. The Empire's future depends on your union with Ambassador Ethan. I trust you will both do what is necessary for the greater good. Ethan's heart sank. The king had made his intentions clear. He wasn't simply asking for peace, he was demanding that the sisters make a choice. A choice that would determine the fate of the galaxy. The king had used his daughters as pawns for too long, and now it seemed he was willing to sacrifice anything to secure the Empire's future. As the message ended, silence hung in the air. Zara stood first, her movements sharp and commanding. We have our orders. The peace talks will proceed, but understand this, Ambassador, there is no room for failure. Lyra, however, looked conflicted. She remained seated, her eyes on Ethan, as though searching for something in his face. Ethan, please, she said softly. Don't let this destroy everything we've worked for. I want peace. I want freedom. I want a future where I'm not bound by my father's plans. Ethan saw the sincerity in her eyes, the fear of a future where she had no control. She wasn't just fighting for her family's empire, she was fighting for her own freedom. Could he trust her? Could he risk everything on the hope that Lyra's vision of peace was genuine? Tell me more, Ethan said, turning his attention fully to Lyra. What does peace mean to you? Lyra's eyes brightened with hope, and she leaned forward slightly, her voice full of emotion. It means ending this endless cycle of war and control. It means allowing our people to choose their own futures, not be forced into alliances based on promises made before we were even born. If you help me, Ethan, we can make a difference. We can end the fighting and bring real change. Zara's eyes flickered between them, her face unreadable. Don't be fooled, Ambassador, she said, her tone as icy as ever. Peace is a luxury. The Shinthar Empire can't afford luxury. If you want peace, you'll need to face the reality of power, just as I have. Ethan stood in the center of the room, torn between the two sisters. Lyra's plea for freedom echoed in his mind, but Zara's words also carried weight. Was peace really possible, or was it just a dream? And if peace was possible, could he trust Lyra to bring it about, or would her father's power always overshadow her efforts? The quiet hum of the palace's technology filled the space as Ethan tried to gather his thoughts. He had hoped to remain neutral, but it was becoming clear that there was no middle ground here. One of the sisters would lead the empire, and the other would fall behind, and Ethan was the one who would help determine who would rise to power as he looked between the two sisters. He realized the true cost of his involvement in this struggle. The future of the Shinthar Empire depended on his decisions, and those Decisions would shape not just the empire, but the future of the galaxy. The days that followed felt like a blur. The peace talks between the Shinthar Empire and the Arvian coalition were growing more intense by the minute. But Ethan's focus was divided between the negotiations and the growing tension between the two royal sisters. He had hoped for a simple solution, a way to bring the galaxy together under one banner. But with each passing day, it became clearer that the royal family's internal conflict was far from simple. Lyra and Zara were both strong, passionate women, but their visions for the future of their empire were as different as night and day. Ethan sat in a private room late one evening, reviewing the reports and data from the peace talks. The glow of the holographic screens lit his face, casting shadows on the walls. He had spent hours going over the same information, hoping to find something that would make the path ahead clearer. But it was no use. The more he read, the more he realized how fragile the situation truly was. As he sat there, lost in thought, a soft knock at the door broke his concentration. "Come in," Ethan said, standing up as the door opened. It was Lyra. Her face was tired, but her eyes were determined. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her gently. "I thought you might be up," she said quietly, walking over to the table where Ethan had been working. "I needed to talk." "To you?" Ethan gestured for her to sit, and she took the seat across from him. Her posture still graceful, despite the weight of the situation. He could see the strain in her face, the worry that had been there since their first meeting. "What's on your mind?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "I'm scared," Lyra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not for myself, but for my people. My father, he's been using us for years. He's always had a plan for everything. And now I'm caught in it, and I don't know how to escape." She paused, looking down at her hands in her lap. "And you're caught in it too, Ambassador, whether you want to be or not." Ethan's heart went out to her. He had never expected to get so close to the royal family, and certainly never imagined that his decisions would affect the future of an entire empire. But as Lyra spoke, he realized just how much weight was on her shoulders. She was trapped in a system that was determined to use her, and yet she still had hope that he could help her. "I didn't ask for any of this," Ethan said softly. "I'm just here to help broker peace. But I understand now that it's not just about the talks. It's about what happens after. Who takes control, who wins, and who loses." Lyra nodded slowly. "Exactly. And my father, he will do whatever it takes to keep his power. He's already made the marriage arrangements, and if you choose me, it will cause a war with my sister. But if you choose Zara, it might mean the end of everything I've worked for." Ethan felt a sense of dread settle in his chest. He had never thought his involvement in this mission would lead to a direct choice between the sisters, but now it was clear. He was standing at the crossroads of history, and every decision he made from here on out would have lasting consequences. Lyra continued, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "Zara believes in power, in control. She wants to rule with strength and fear. But I want peace. I want to free my people from this constant cycle of war and manipulation. I want a future where we don't have to fight for everything we have." Ethan could see the sincerity in her eyes, the same passion that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. She wasn't just a princess, trapped in the politics of her family. She was a person who believed in something better, something more. But could he trust her vision? Could he trust that she would be able to break free from her father's influence, even if it meant going against everything she had been taught? "I believe in you, Lyra," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I also know that Zara is not someone to be underestimated. She's ruthless, and her ambition is unmatched. She won't stop until she has everything." Lyra's face hardened slightly at the mention of her sister's name, but her eyes remained soft. "Zara is like our father. She believes in strength, in power. But I've always believed there's more to life than that. I've always believed there's a way to change the system, to end the fighting." Ethan sighed and stood, walking over to the window and looking out at the stars. The galaxy stretched out before him, a vast and endless void. It was easy to see why people fought so hard for control. Power, after all, was what allowed someone to change their world. But was that the kind of change that would bring peace? Or just more destruction? As he stood there, lost in thought, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Turning around, he saw Zara standing in the doorway. Her expression unreadable. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "But I think we need to talk." Lyra's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and frustration, but she didn't speak. Ethan could feel the tension rise in the room, thick and suffocating. Zara walked into the room without waiting for an invitation, her gaze flicking from Lyra to Ethan. "I know what you're thinking," she said coolly. "Think that by choosing Lyra, you'll be choosing peace. But what you fail to see is that power is the only way to achieve real peace. You can't have a peaceful galaxy without someone in control, someone strong enough to keep the peace." Ethan shook his head. "Peace doesn't come from control. It comes from understanding, from trust." Zara smirked, her eyes glinting. "That's where you're wrong, Ambassador. Trust doesn't keep people in line, fear does, and I have plenty of both." Lyra stood up abruptly, her voice rising. "Zara, you're wrong. You can't just rule with fear. It's not the way to bring peace. It's only going to lead to more destruction." Ethan stepped between them, his voice calm but firm. "Enough. I can't choose between you two like this. You both want what's best for your people, but you can't see eye to eye. I'm not here to take sides. I'm here to bring peace." But as he spoke, he knew it was no longer just about peace. It was about choosing a future, about deciding who would shape the galaxy and who would be left behind. The days following the heated conversation between the sisters felt heavier for Ethan, the lines between peace and power. Love and duty were becoming blurred, and every time he thought he had a clear understanding of his role, something else complicated the situation. His thoughts were constantly with Lyra and Zara, the two women who had drawn him into their conflict, each pulling him in different directions. Ethan's hope for a peaceful solution was fading, but he didn't know what else to do. It seemed like no matter which choice he made, someone would be left in the dust. As the peace talks continued, the stakes only grew higher. One evening, as he was walking back to his quarters, he was stopped by a familiar voice. It was Lyra, standing alone in the shadow of a tall column, her figure barely visible in the dim light. "Ethan," she called softly, stepping forward. "I need to talk to you." He walked over to her, noticing the serious expression on her face. "What's going on, Lyra?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. The weight of the past few days had clearly worn on her too. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Father is pressuring me to choose. He wants me to marry you, but I can't make that decision, not like this. It's not just about the Empire. It's about me, about what I want." Ethan listened closely. "What is it you want, Lyra?" She paused, looking down at the floor before meeting his eyes. "I want a chance to live my own life where I can choose. I don't want to be a pawn in someone else's game. It feels like I don't have a choice. I have to follow the rules of this empire, or everything will fall apart." Words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He had always believed that peace was the solution, but now he realized that peace might not be enough. Lyra wasn't just fighting for a political agreement, she was fighting for her own future. She was struggling to be free of the chains that her family and her father's plans had wrapped around her. "I want to help you," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "But I can't do this alone. You need to be strong, Lyra. You need to fight for what you believe in, not just for your people, but for yourself." Lyra nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'm trying, but I feel like the walls are closing in on me." Before Ethan could say more, a sudden noise made them both turn. Zara appeared from the shadows, her eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't waste time with her," Zara said, her tone icy. "You know where your loyalty should lie, Ambassador." Ethan felt the tension rise instantly. Zara had always been direct and sharp, but there was something different about the way she spoke now. It was almost like a challenge. "I'm trying to understand both of you," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'm not choosing anyone right now. I'm trying to find a way forward, to bring peace." Zara stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his, Peace. You think you can bring peace to this empire? My empire? Her voice dropped, and there was a dangerous edge to it now. You can't. The Shinthar Empire doesn't need peace. It needs strength. It needs someone who will fight for what's theirs. I'll give you that, Ethan. Lyra stepped forward, her expression fierce. No, Zara, you're wrong. We need a future where our people can live without fear. A future where power isn't the only thing that matters. Zara's eyes flicked to Lyra for a brief moment before she turned back to Ethan. You think that's possible? You think this war is about anything other than survival? Lyra lives in a dream, but I live in reality. The galaxy doesn't care about dreams. Ethan felt the weight of her words. Zara was right in some ways. Peace in this galaxy had always been hard to come by, and strength had often been the only language people understood. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra's dream of peace was worth fighting for. Before he could respond, Zara reached into her cloak and pulled out a small encrypted data chip, handing it to Ethan. Take this, she said coldly. Contains everything you need to understand the true nature of my father's plans. If you truly want to know what's at stake here, you'll look at it, but I'm warning you, once you do, there's no turning back. Ethan took the chip reluctantly, his mind racing with the implications of what it might contain. Was Zara offering him a chance to understand her side of the story? Or was this another manipulation, a way to pull him further into her web? As he held the chip, Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. Please, Ethan, don't let her pull you in. This isn't about power, it's about freedom. Zara smirked. You think you have the luxury of freedom, Lyra? We don't live in a world where freedom comes easily. We live in a world where decisions are made for us, and we take what we can. Ethan looked between the two sisters, feeling the weight of the decision that lay before him. It was no longer just about peace. It was about which future they would fight for, the one where power ruled, or the one where dreams of freedom had a chance to live. I'll look at it, Ethan said finally, his voice steady but his heart heavy. But I need to make my own decisions, not be forced into one. Zara nodded sharply, her eyes gleaming with something like satisfaction. I hope you make the right choice. As she walked away, Ethan turned to Lyra, who was still watching him with a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. He could feel the weight of her gaze, the silent plea for him to stand by her side. Ethan, Lyra said softly, I don't want you to choose out of fear or pressure. Choose because you believe in something. Choose because you want a future with peace. But Ethan knew that making the right choice would be harder than just picking one sister over the other. It was about choosing a future for the galaxy, one that could either heal the wounds of the past or tear everything apart. As he left the room that night, Ethan knew that the next few days would decide everything. The choices he made could lead to the rise of a new empire or its destruction. The weight of the choices ahead hung heavy in Ethan's chest. He had spent the last few days locked in his own thoughts, trying to find a solution that would bring peace to the Shinthar Empire and the galaxy. Yet, with every step forward, it felt like he was only stepping deeper into a web of politics, lies, and betrayal. Ethan sat alone in his quarters, staring at the encrypted data chip that Zara had given him. It sat on the desk in front of him, small and unassuming, yet it carried the weight of the Empire's future. The fate of Lyra, Zara, and the entire galaxy might rest on the information it contained. He didn't know whether to trust Zara's offer or not. Was this truly the truth, or just another manipulation to further her own ambitions? He glanced across the room at the holographic map of the galaxy. The Shinthar Empire stretched across vast regions, their influence touching countless systems. In some ways, it was the most powerful empire in the galaxy. But in others, it was fragile. Built on old promises and old rivalries, a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he said, already knowing who it was. Lyra entered, her expression serious but soft, like she always was when she wasn't playing the role of a princess. The weight of the Empire's expectations was clear in her eyes. But there was still a fire there, something that made her stand apart from her sister. Ethan, she said quietly, walking over to the table. Have you looked at it, Ethan? Nodded slowly. I've been thinking about it. But I don't know if I can trust it. It feels like one more piece of the game Zara's been playing with me. He shook his head, frustration building. How did it all come to this, Lyra? Lyra sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired, as if the weight of her family's expectations and the pressure of the Empire's future were pushing down on her. I don't know, she said softly. But I know one thing for sure. This Empire isn't what it seems. Zara and I, we were never really given a choice. We were born into this, and for as long as I can remember. Everything we did was for the Empire, not for ourselves. Ethan met her gaze, his heart heavy. And you want to change that? You want freedom? Lyra nodded. I do. I want a future where we're not slaves to our father's rules, where the Empire doesn't tear us apart. I want something different. Ethan, I want peace. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't just asking for political power. She was asking for the freedom to choose her own path. And that, he realized, was something that everyone deserved. But could she lead the Empire in a way that would bring real change? Or was she too caught in the web her father had woven for her? I believe in you, Lyra, Ethan said quietly, leaning forward. But I don't know if I can believe in your father's empire. I've seen how the galaxy works. Power is what drives everything. Without it, there's no stability. But I don't want to live in a galaxy where people are constantly at war because of someone's need for control. I don't want that either, Lyra whispered. But I believe there's a way to change it. If you help me, I can make a difference. We can make a difference. Her words gave Ethan hope, but it wasn't enough to silence the voice in his head that kept reminding him of Zara's cold calculations. He had to make a choice, and the stakes were higher than ever before. Just as he was about to speak, the door opened again, and this time it was Zara who entered. She didn't wait for an invitation, walking straight into the room with her usual air of confidence. The tension in the room immediately spiked. You've had enough time to think, I trust, Zara said, her tone as icy as ever. She glanced at Lyra but didn't acknowledge her. I hope you've made up your mind, Ambassador. Ethan stood up slowly, his heart racing. He had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to proceed. Zara's eyes flicked toward the encrypted chip on the table, her expression unreadable. You think you can change everything, don't you? Zara said, her voice smooth, almost pitying. You think that by choosing Lyra, you'll somehow create a new future for the Empire. But you're wrong. Power doesn't work that way. Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. Maybe power doesn't work that way, but maybe it's not the only thing that matters. I'm not looking for control, Zara. I'm looking for a way to bring peace to this empire, and that means not ruling with fear. Zara's expression hardened, her eyes cold and calculating. Fear keeps the empire together, Ethan. Without it, we would crumble. You think that Lyra can offer peace? But she doesn't understand the true nature of power. It's not enough to hope for something better. You have to fight for it. Lyra stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. No, Zara, we don't have to fight. We don't have to tear everything apart to keep the empire together. We can change things. We can build something better. Zara stepped closer, her voice low and dangerous. Then you're just as naive as I thought, Lyra. The galaxy doesn't care about dreams. It only cares about who has the power to shape it. And that's why you'll lose. Because you don't understand the game. Ethan stepped between them, his voice rising as he tried to keep the peace. Enough, both of you. This isn't about your Game of Thrones. This is about the future of everyone in this empire. If you both want to change things, then you need to stop fighting each other and start working together. For a moment, there was silence. Zara's eyes flickered with something like doubt, but her face remained unreadable. Lyra, on the other hand, looked at Ethan with a mixture of hope and fear, as if she was waiting for him to make the right decision. I've looked at the data, Ethan said slowly, his mind made up. And I can see now that Zara is right about one thing: power does matter. But it's not just about control. It's about who we choose to lead with that power. And that's why I'm choosing to stand with you, Lyra. Zara's eyes narrowed, her expression turning cold. You'll regret this, Ambassador. You'll see. My father will not tolerate betrayal. Ethan stood tall, his voice firm. I'm not betraying anyone. I'm choosing peace. And if that means standing by Lyra and her vision for a better future, then that's what I'll do. Now with those final words, Zara turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Ethan and Lyra alone. Lyra's face softened and a small smile appeared on her lips. Thank you, Ethan. I promise you won't regret this. Together, we can make a change. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of clarity for the first time in days. He had made his choice. It wasn't the easy path, but it was the right one. And as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he knew that the future of the Shinthar Empire was in their hands now.